Hello, friends. Welcome to Storycraft. On this channel, you will enjoy world top stories. Let's view the video. Anglo-Saxon Huscarls. The shield wall rises. Birth of the Huscarls. A kingdom in peril. In the early 11th century, England was a kingdom teetering on the edge of chaos. Viking raids had scorched its shores, internal rivalries fractured its nobility, and the throne was far from secure. King Canute the Great, a Danish conqueror who seized England in 1016, knew that ruling this fractured land required more than just a crown. It demanded an unbreakable sword arm. The King's Iron Circle. To protect his rule and bring unity to the land, King Canute formed an elite guard, the Huscarls. These were no ordinary warriors. Chosen for their strength, discipline, and loyalty, they became the king's personal protectors, his iron circle. Trained in deadly combat and unwavering obedience, a Huscarl did not serve a crown. He served the man who wore it. Clad in chainmail, bearing massive round shields and razor-sharp Danish axes, they were the embodiment of martial prowess. In the court and on the battlefield, their presence was a warning. The king was never alone. Forged in loyalty. Becoming a Huscarl was not a right, it was an honor earned through loyalty and valor. They swore oaths not in churches, but on swords and over mead halls, pledging to stand beside their lord until death. Many came from noble families, but even common warriors who proved themselves in combat could rise to join this feared brotherhood. Their code was simple but absolute. Protect the king, defend the realm, never break the shield wall. Training of the elite. Each Huscarl was forged through brutal training. From sun-up to sundown, they drilled with axes, swords, and spears. They learned to fight as a wall, their shields interlocking, their steps moving as one. They were taught not to break formation even if the man beside them fell. Precision, strength, and control. Their lives depended on it. But they were not just fighters. Huscarls were also enforcers of law, royal messengers, and figures of fear and respect in every shire they passed through. The rise of a warrior class. As years passed, the Huscarls evolved from a royal bodyguard into a warrior class. They were granted lands, wealth, and prestige. When King Edward the Confessor ruled, and later Harold Godwinson, the Huscarls stood as the bulwark of English might. Their reputation spread far beyond the sea, their discipline unmatched, their courage legendary. Villagers told tales of their unbreakable shield walls, of how a single Huscarl could hold a bridge against dozens. They weren't just soldiers. They were living symbols of duty and strength. And when the storm of war began to darken the horizon, it was these men who would stand first and fall last. Sworn by blood, the vow to defend the king, the oath of steel. In the heart of a great mead hall, firelight flickered on polished armor and sharpened axes. One by one, warriors stepped forward, kneeling before the throne. Each clasped their blade in both hands, pressing the steel to their lips, then to their chest. Before gods and men, they spoke the sacred words. To my king, my sword. To my lord, my life. With that they became Huscarls, sworn by blood, bound by honor. The oath was more than ceremony. It was a contract sealed in loyalty. Breaking it was treason. Keeping it meant a lifetime of vigilance, sacrifice, and glory. Bound to a living crown. A Huscarl did not serve an abstract idea of a kingdom. He served a living, breathing man, the king. His fate was tethered to the king's heart. If the king fell in battle, the Huscarl was expected to die beside him. If the king rode to war, his guard marched ahead. If the king slept, the Huscarls stood watch. They were more than bodyguards. They were extensions of royal will. Their loyalty was tested not only in war, but in politics, treachery, and peace. Some whispered that a king without Huscarls was already half dead. Rituals of loyalty. The swearing in of a new Huscarl was a sacred event. Mead flowed, the skalds sang, and the runes were carved into bone and stone. A drop of blood, usually from the warrior's palm, was spilled into a bowl mixed with mead and drunk by both the king and the new brother in arms. It was said that once the king drank of a warrior's blood, his spirit would be bound to that man until death. This ritual blurred the line between ruler and soldier. It was not just obedience. It was shared fate. A life under watchful eyes. Once sworn, a Huscarl lived under constant scrutiny. Every gesture, every word, every glance was judged. Cowardice was punished by exile. Dishonor meant disgrace, and disgrace could only be erased by death in battle. Among themselves, Huscarls formed bonds deeper than blood. They trained together, ate together, bled together. Disputes were settled with fists or steel. Betrayal was unthinkable. In the barracks, silence fell when a king's name was spoken. Even whispers carried weight. Enemies within and without. Not all threats to the king came with swords drawn. Some came cloaked in velvet, whispered behind council doors. The Huscarls became more than warriors. They were eyes and ears, ever watching. If a noble plotted rebellion, it was a Huscarl who often delivered justice. In return, they were feared. Few dared cross a man who had the king's blood in his veins, symbolically or not. The price of the vow. The vow came with cost. A Huscarl could not wed without the king's approval. He could not own land freely unless gifted. Children of Huscarls often grew up fatherless, for war and duty allowed no rest. But despite the burden, most would not trade their title for 10 estates. For to be a Huscarl was to walk with death and glory side by side. It was to be remembered not as a man, but as a legend bound to a throne. Steel and loyalty. Life of a Saxon elite warrior. The call of the axe. The life of a Saxon Huscarl was shaped by the call of the battle horn. From dawn to dusk, a Huscarl's world revolved around steel and strategy. The scent of oiled leather, the clang of axes, and the sound of battle drills were as familiar as the wind. These were men forged by the grind of war and battle. They lived for the clash of blades, the roar of the shield wall, and the glory of victory. Their training began before the sun had risen, when the first light of day barely touched the horizon. Hours of practice, swordplay, shield techniques, and hand-to-hand combat taught them the fundamentals. They became an extension of their weapons, moving with the fluidity and precision of a striking serpent. Strength in unity. Huscarls were not merely individual warriors. They were a brotherhood. The shield wall was their strength, the formation that made them nearly unstoppable. Each Huscarl's shield was a link in an unbroken chain. One man's weakness could collapse the wall and doom them all. But when they moved as one, their might was unmatched. Their training was designed to instill unity above all. In the chaos of war, when the world blurred into screams and the chaos of clashing blades, Huscarls fought not for individual glory, but for the strength of the shield wall and the life of their king. The weight of the shield. A Huscarl's shield was his identity. It was often painted with vibrant designs or adorned with the colors of his lord. This shield was not just protection. It was a symbol of loyalty, strength, and defiance. Huscarls carried them into battle as a second skin. They were trained to hold their ground, to form a solid front against any enemy, whether Viking raiders, rival Saxon forces, or Norman invaders. The shield wall was no place for hesitation. Every Huscarl was expected to stand firm, unyielding, and silent under the onslaught. When the shield wall held, the enemies would break against it, their spirits shattered, their advance halted. The king's voice. A Huscarl's bond to his king was not just ceremonial, it was spiritual. The king was more than a ruler. They were a living symbol of the kingdom's strength and unity. Huscarls were never far from their king's side, protecting him not just in battle but in every waking moment. But the king's voice also rang out in the hearts of his warriors. When a battle was lost, it was the Huscarl who would say, "We fight again for our king." When the king fell, it was the Huscarls who were expected to lay down their lives to protect the throne. To them, their king's will was law. Failure was not an option, for failure meant dishonor. Tested in the crucible. War was their crucible. Every battle was a test of resolve, and it was in those moments that a Huscarl's loyalty was truly forged. The battlefield was their home. They bled for their brothers, their king, and their land. Each Huscarl knew the risks, death, injury, or disgrace, but they embraced it with a cold, unwavering heart. The tales of their bravery spread far beyond the battlefield. In villages, the common folk spoke of the Huscarls with awe and reverence. They were the invincible shield that held back the forces of chaos, the last line of defense for England's future. The burden of glory. But with glory came the burden of sacrifice. Huscarls lived hard lives, never knowing when their last battle would be fought, never seeing their families grow old. They were expected to be perfect, to embody the ideals of duty and loyalty. To fail was to be lost in history. But to succeed, to stand tall in battle, meant living forever in the songs of bards and the memories of kings. The life of a Saxon Huscarl was one of unwavering dedication, where every action, every breath, was for the king and the kingdom. To them, there was no greater calling. The last stand at Hastings, Huscarls versus the Normans, a kingdom on the edge. The year was 1066. The winds of war blew heavy across England. King Harold Godwinson sat on his throne, exhausted but resolute. The crown had been his by birthright, but now it was threatened from every side. The Vikings were a distant memory, but a new foe had risen, a force more terrifying than any that had come before, the Normans, led by William the Conqueror. For the Huscarls, this was no ordinary battle. This was the final test of loyalty. The shield wall would hold or crumble beneath the weight of history. The fate of England rested on their shoulders. March to battle. The news of William's invasion was swift. Ships carrying thousands of Norman soldiers landed on the southern coast of England, and Harold wasted no time. He gathered his Huscarls, the finest warriors in the land, and marched south to meet the invaders. As they moved across the countryside, their eyes were fixed on the horizon. They were prepared for war, ready to stand firm in their final defense of the kingdom. They knew the coming battle would not be like any other. They were not just fighting for land, wealth, or power. They were fighting for their king. They were fighting for the soul of England itself. The Shield Wall at Hastings. On October 14, 1066, the armies met on the field near Hastings. The Saxons, led by King Harold, took up their position atop Senlac Hill, forming a mighty shield wall. The Huscarls stood at the center, their large round shields interlocked, axes ready to strike. The Norman cavalry, with their deadly knights, charged first, but the Saxon shield wall held firm. The clash was thunderous. Horses reared, shields splintered, and the air was thick with the screams of battle. The Huscarls were in their element, each blow of their axes a death sentence for any who dared breach the wall. They fought as one, a singular living force, driven by their oath to protect their king. Betrayal of the shield wall. But as the hours passed, the battle began to turn. The Norman forces, cunning and relentless, adopted new tactics. They feigned retreat, drawing the Saxon forces out of their stronghold. The Huscarls, loyal to the end, were quick to pursue. But this was a trap. The Normans turned, and the Saxon lines were broken. It was a moment of betrayal, not by the warriors, but by their own desperation. The Huscarls fought valiantly, but the tide was turning. The shield wall, once an impenetrable fortress, began to fragment as the Saxons chased after the retreating Normans. Harold's fall. Amidst the chaos, King Harold fought at the front lines, his axe striking down one foe after another. But fate, cruel as ever, struck him down. An arrow pierced his eye, and the king fell. The heart of the Saxon army shattered with his death. As Harold's body fell, so too did the shield wall begin to crumble. The Huscarls, bound by their oath, fought on, but without their king, they were no longer the invincible force they had once been. One by one, they were cut down, their axes falling silent as the Norman forces surged forward. A legacy lost. By the end of the day, the Saxon army was decimated. The Battle of Hastings had been won, and with it, the Normans claimed England as their own. The Huscarls, who had stood so bravely at the heart of the shield wall, were no more. Their legacy, however, lived on in the songs and stories that would follow. In the aftermath, England would never be the same. The Huscarls' final stand at Hastings became a symbol of ultimate sacrifice, a reminder of a time when warriors were bound not just by steel, but by a bond of loyalty that transcended death. The Huscarls' legacy. Echoes of the shield wall. The end of an era. The Battle of Hastings marked the end of the Saxon rule and the fall of the Huscarls as an elite fighting force. With the Normans in control, the mighty shield wall of the Saxons crumbled, and the Huscarls, the heart of the defense, were no longer the terror of their enemies. Yet their legacy lived on. The legacy in the shadows. Though the Huscarls were defeated, their spirit did not vanish. The tales of their bravery, Their unwavering loyalty to King Harold spread across the land. The shield wall, once thought unbreakable, became a symbol of resistance and pride, a story passed down through generations. Influence on future warriors. Norman knights, who had once feared the Huscarls' battle prowess, began to adapt. The formation of the shield wall and the Huscarls' battle tactics influenced future warriors across Europe. Their style of combat became a cornerstone of medieval warfare. Even in defeat, the Huscarls left an indelible mark on history. The lasting echo of the shield wall. For centuries, England remembered the Huscarls as the last line of defense against foreign invaders. Their courage became the foundation of future warriors, their name synonymous with honor, loyalty, and sacrifice. Though they were gone, the Huscarls' legacy was carried on in the hearts of those who would continue the fight to protect their homeland. Thanks for watching. Subscribe our channel Storycraft for more interesting videos.